Hi, everybody, and welcome to the third installment of the Weekly Word Pod Blast. So once again, I'm going to try to keep it brief, but because it was a race week and there's a lot going on, as well as a lot of people racing, and I have extra time in the car driving back from Park City, Utah, this might go a little bit longer. But at about 20 to 25 minutes, I'll give you a heads up on where we're at and what's remaining in the pod blast with regards to subjects and topics and how long it will continue. So I'm driving back from Park City, Utah. It's rainy, it's cloudy, it's cold, and I'm pretty stoked that I didn't have this weather up at 10,000 feet on the ridge on Friday and Saturday morning. A long race that was. So today's podcast will be more about the race report, sort of updates of what I learned and how the race went. But I will also give some updates regarding Santa Cruz 70.3 and some other tidbits with regards to racing, recovery, and returning back to training, what to focus on for the next events, and how to sort of download, or how I sort of download a race and then decide what to choose next, when to choose it next, what sport to choose next, and why. Well, off to Wasatch 100 and how it went. So I arrived on Wednesday. Beautiful weather in Park City, 70s, sunny, not a cloud in the sky, and it started getting cooler and cooler as the days went by there for my Friday morning 5 a.m. start, which was also really nice because that meant the high temperatures would be in the low 60s, up on the ridge maybe 50s, high 40s. Ideal running weather, especially at altitude and in the sun, knowing that it gets hotter in the sun, that dry heat, as well as being so much closer to the sunburn and cooler temperatures were much desired. My ginormous crew showed up on Thursday. I picked most of them up from the airport on Thursday morning. A few others arrived Thursday midday. We got our race packet picked up, and back up to Park City we went for a quiet afternoon of logistics and food and dinner and beers and more food and more dinner and more beers. As I mentioned in the last pod blast, the race was basically broken up into three 30 plus mile stretches. So the first real crew and big aid station was at mile 31. The next one was at mile 45, but that was a limited crew access aid station due to traffic on the highway in past years. As well, it was at only 13 miles past the other main big crew aid station. The next big crew aid station was at mile 67, and then, of course, at the finish line. The plan was, as you might have heard in the second podcast, that I would run solo, or you don't have a choice, you have to run solo, to the first big crew aid station at mile 31. Then I would run with a pacer from 31 to 45, a different pacer from 45 to 67, and then again a different pacer from 67 until 100, because that's a full nighttime stretch. So it's one pacer, one access point, and that's it. Each one of the main crew aid stations, we set up bins with all the necessary items that I might need. First aid kits, the type of food I want, the drinks I want, the sunscreens I want, the snacks I would want, anything that's not offered on the course, any type of clothing, change of shoes, change of socks, everything that you could possibly want after 7-8 hour stretches of running. So we were quite well organized. We had paces in mind, we had time checks, and the crew had all these logistics well organized and again, with a crew this big, it made it quite easy that nobody was overwhelmed with any type of work. Easily split up and easily get to different access points with the different cars we had and my truck and so on. So we also had some locals where the crew was staying. So we also had local cars, local mountain bikes, and all kinds of other items to make it easier for the crew to work through this 24-hour plus day of supporting me. And there we had it. It was now Friday morning. I woke up around 2:45 in the morning. So given that I'd just gotten here from California on Wednesday, it still felt like 1:45 in the morning California time. Quick cup of coffee, a little bit of breakfast, and one of my crew members and I were out of the house from Park City at 3:30 to drive approximately an hour to get to the start line up in Kaysville, north of Salt Lake City, for the Wasatch 100. A very relaxed ultra running start. We got there around 4:30. Topped off on some fluids, used the bathrooms, checked my number in at the start, said hi to a few people on text, including my mom who was calling, and then you just walk up, stand in line. 2 minutes later, the gun goes off and off you go, right at 5 a.m. on Friday morning. Go from mile 2 to mile 7 is basically straight uphill. So that meant 2 miles on pavement, rolling through this little town of Kaysville, and then back into the trails we went. And as of mile 2.2, it really kicked up. We went from 4,500 feet to 9,000 feet in a matter of 4.5 miles. That was as challenging as expected. It was as steep as expected. And the fast hiking, big step walking up a steep hill was nothing surprising or unfamiliar. I felt pretty fine doing that. In hindsight, did I push too hard there? No, I don't think so. I think I maintained good control. But it is a long time to be hiking straight uphill. So the challenge became eating and drinking right off the bat, that you, despite the high effort or the high engagement of going such a steep hill, to still maintain your time checks with regards to food and drink. And I think that all went pretty well. Temperatures were quite comfortable. Since we were down in the valley, it was still in the upper 40s. And we quickly worked our way up to the ridge, and faster than what we had planned time, we being this group I was hiking with. But it still felt really good, and nothing surprising, and all systems were go. Once up on the ridge, we worked our way a little bit higher, but it wasn't nearly as steep. It's actually runnable, nice steady grade, to about 9,500 feet. And that's when we just stayed up on the ridge and ran a bunch of rollers before a nice, steady, long 4.5 mile downhill grade on a big, wide Jeep trail where they do a lot of OHV riding and usage there. So while the trail was great and while it was nice and wide, it was just a long downhill. And early on at this point now, we're talking mile 9 maybe, you're already recognizing that your quads are getting quite a bit of pounding from the length of the downhill and the work they had done and engaged going uphill for so steep for so long, now being engaged and differently but still steadily for another 4 miles steady downhill. I could tell this might be an issue later on in my day. Got to mile 11 and quickly grabbed some water. It was a little quasi truck there with a huge tank of water in the back of the pickup truck. that the guy would just be pouring pictures out of, and that was the only access for a truck or any vehicle to get up there. It was pretty rough terrain, and it was pretty early in the morning on a Friday, so it was just a water-only aid station. Quickly topped off on some fluids, ate some more food, and continued running, staying on the ridge. And this is now mile 11. Body still feels great, nothing too surprising, but you can start thinking and feeling and recognizing how the body might hold up for the next 15, 20 miles. Anything beyond that is just unrealistic to think what the body might do. So you just try to find a rhythm and hold that and take in this absolutely spectacular terrain that we were running in, from north of Salt Lake City all the way along the Wasatch Ridge to basically what's called Big Mountain, which is a high peak up north of Park City by about 15 miles. Got to the first real aid station with food and drink at mile 16. Still no issues, still feeling good, all topped off, still on my calories, still on my hydration. The body is responding. Not that you're pushing, but you're just running with the legs that you have at that moment. Nothing hard, nothing easy, just steady. First aid station, I had a few peanut butter and jellies on nice, good old-fashioned white bread that they cut into little triangles. Foraged a little bit for some food and some fruit. I had some grapes and stuff like that, but again, it's still so early on. You're just taking a look at what's offered, getting your water, getting some electrolytes, and you keep moving on. Maybe short 1 minute, 1.5 minute stop there. Off we go. The next 15 miles become a little bit of a mind game, not because of how you're feeling, but it's hard to understand how much further you still have to go to make 100 miles. And so when you're running at 18, 21, 22 miles, and going by how you're feeling and just how the body's responding, which was still good, it's just still hard to fathom, well, wow, I'm 18 or I'm 22 miles in, I'm 23 miles in, 25 miles in, and yet I'm not even a quarter of the way. I still have all this day to run and all the coming night. So it just, you do hit some low points because I think mainly because your brain can't really do the math, comprehend, project how much further you have to go. So it seems quite overwhelming. So you're constantly but you're constantly pushing back on these thoughts of, wow, this is really far. How are you going to do this? How are you feeling? So you just keep putting a foot in front of the other and keep ticking off these aid stations that were anywhere from 5 to 8 miles apart, which in ultra running means anywhere from an hour to 2 hours apart, depending on the terrain, depending on how steep, depending on how many ups and downs. I knew I was running well early on, feeling good. I knew the time checks that I was a good ways ahead of them. I saw my pace was pretty good. Again, the only thing I started noticing was that my quads really started fatiguing and started getting a little sore on the downhills. I got lost a little bit on one of the main intersections, not far, maybe a couple 100 yards, at which point I noticed that there were no more running tracks, so didn't really bother me that much. Another time I caught it pretty quickly, maybe 50 yards in. I started looking around and realizing that I'm not on the right trail, but otherwise pretty uneventful, running through some valleys and beautiful terrain. This is the part of the course that in hindsight I look back and it just was absolutely spectacular. Such gorgeous scenery, such a beautiful day with not a single cloud in the sky, such perfect temperatures. Support was great, plenty of food. You're just feeling good. And when the bad feelings or the bad thoughts or the negative emotions did spring up, you know that you just keep plugging away. 5, 10, 15 minutes, it'll go away, and you get some food in you, and you just keep moving. A lot of this part of the course is still runnable too. So you're feeling good about how you're moving, how you're gradually ticking off miles. You feel that you're doing an ultra run versus an ultra hike, especially how it started with basically 2.5 hours of hiking uphill. But now you're in the flow, and you're getting some fantastic views and great aid stations on the top of these ridges, a bunch of cars and forest rangers set up. So really, really an exciting experience. I start rolling off the ridgeline and into the first crew spot aid station, which you're focused on the last 5-7 miles, because you've been running alone and you're just excited to see your friends and your crew and your things and your clothes and your own food. And so you start really looking ahead to that mile 31 aid station, where you're back in your own world. You're speaking with people. You're not in this huge open territory by yourself, and sort of can get out of your head a little bit and talk with your pacer as well as your crew sitting there. So I started rolling into mile 31 and sat down, and right away I noticed my quads were quite painful, especially the long downhill of switchbacks going into the mile 31 aid station. I could tell this might become problematic later on. So that was my main worry. I was on it with fluids, I was on it with fuel, I was on it with pacing, still way ahead of the main pacing goals that I had. So not necessarily going too fast, but also projecting that a lot of the course and the difficulties will come later, that I will take the time and take what the legs are giving me right now. At the crew aid station, I sit down, have a turkey and cheese and hummus sandwich on whole wheat bread, or most of it. Eat a few things, now put a bunch more sunscreen on, change my top, throw some Aquaphor on some spots on my feet that I can feel are pretty dry and rubbing, not with each other, but just against my shoe. And then about 10 to 12 minutes in, I start getting up and moving out of there again, now with my first pacer. And that's where I hit my first real wall. Despite having a pacer and despite everything going as planned, mile 31 to 41 were just, as I described, miserable. I had no reason to be miserable. I wasn't hungry, I wasn't thirsty. I was a little bit of behind on calories, but nothing that would justify any type of bad sensations. I didn't pace it wrong. It was just a hard stretch. They happened. It happened to me in the last 100-miler that I did. And despite my pacer asking and making sure that everything was okay and if there was anything she could do to help, I was just quiet and kept to myself and worked through that space that I was expecting at any time. It can happen at mile 20, it can happen at mile 40, it can happen at mile 60, it can happen twice. It can happen at mile 60 and 40 and 80. So the main point I'm making here is that for about 8 miles, I was just not in a happy place. My quads were screaming on all the downhills. I was concerned about the remaining mileage, how it's going to change, and I was just in a little bit of a funk. Nothing that I wasn't familiar with, nothing that was making me worry that I wouldn't finish, nothing that really required me to, pull myself out of some deep, dark hole. I just sort of accepted that these miles right now are miserable and they sort of suck. And despite having a pacer and despite it still being quite beautiful, I was just not in that place, not in that space. And I knew I had plenty of real estate, plenty of time ahead for the day, that these things, these funks, these emotional valleys, they happen. And at about mile 41, maybe even 39, 40, there was an aid station, and I started my first cup of Coca-Cola, had some Advil, and the turnaround happened real quickly with a little caffeine, with the Advil to address some of the pain from the quads. Next thing you know, I was feeling good and running 41 to 45, that next main crew aid station, feeling steady and back in control of the day. At 45 now, this is another major crew station. Your brain is somewhat wrapped around like that it's halfway, and you feel pretty good about it. I sit down, tended to my feet and some dry spots. Still didn't change any shoes or socks. Felt pretty good about how I was feeling coming into that aid station those last 4 miles. We switched pacers, took some pictures, ate a bunch of food, had a Mexican Coke, which tastes fantastic. Had more turkey and cheese, or maybe even ham and cheese sandwich. Had a variety of different items that they offered at the aid station tables. Peanut butter filled pretzels, threw on some more sunscreen, changed backpacks, mainly because now it is, I think it was 3 o'clock. Now I don't remember. But the main reason we changed backpacks is because now I had to also carry a light and clothes for the ridge and temperatures dropping as I would be running into the night. This was 45 to 67, so the next 22 miles. So yeah, it was about 3 o'clock. 3 o'clock in the afternoon now. So 10 hours into running. And we had to pack a bunch of clothes in there, knowing that the temperatures were going to drop, the sun was going to go away, and it would be cold, and we needed lights and so on. So we had a backup backpack ready to go with everything we needed. Also added some more Advil, and made sure I had all the salt and Advil and things I needed for this next stretch. The next stretch was awesome. It was through this beautiful Lambs Canyon, up a long, steady climb, and then up on the ridge. But the ridge wasn't exposed, so you stayed in trees. Beautiful aspen tree groves. The colors had changed. It was just a spectacular part of the run. Afternoon, the sun setting through some beautiful high mountain lakes, Desolation Lake, Dog Lake, some beautiful backcountry, and the aid stations were stocked with these people who had hiked in, stayed in tents for the night, had all kinds of cool gear with them, as well as they hiked in and brought in some amazing food to offer to the runners. And knowing that I'm pretty early on and still during the day, knowing that how many people are still going to be coming through for the next 6, 12, 14 hours before the cutoff, and that they're going to be there in this freezing cold, in the dark, and they're going to get some of the things that they stocked at these aid stations. It really was pretty amazing to see these volunteers up there in the middle of the backcountry, in the middle of nowhere, and just being volunteers and providing aid. At this point now, I'm on a lot of Coca-Cola at every aid station, nice salty potato chips. I'm eating a fair amount of food. I'm a little bit behind, but again, nothing that I'm too worried about. I don't feel like calories, being a little bit behind on calories, is causing any type of performance issues. And it's a long, steady grind through beautiful, beautiful backcountry. All kinds of characters at these aid stations, different foods, and we're continuing to work our way up to Scotts Peak, which that is around 9,500 feet again, up on the ridge, and just an absolutely spectacular ridge line where you have views of Park City and Salt Lake City on both sides, and now the sun's setting. And we're getting up on this ridge. I'm feeling great. I'm starting to run a little bit faster, make up time, not necessarily time on my pace, but more about making up time. As I said to my pacer, hey, I have the legs right now. I might as well take them because I know this won't last, and holding back doesn't feel any better. So I'm just going to go with it. So I worked my way up through the the field a little bit, nothing dramatic, maybe 3, 4, 5 people, but felt really good. And we put our headlights on and put on some layers of clothing and worked our way down to the next crew aid station in the dark around 9 p.m. at about 8,500 feet, called Brighton. It's a ski resort up on the backside of the canyons and Park City ski resorts. And it's dark, it's cold, and we roll in around 9 p.m. and you work your way into this ski lodge, and they have a wonderful selection of foods, from grilled cheeses to, of course, many more potato chips, to soups, to broth, to chicken noodle soup, to vegetable minestrone, to Twizzlers, and all kinds of candy. So I sat down for a while in there. Each of those crew main stops I was focused on about a 15-minute stop. That's plenty to sit down, replenish, exhale a bit, check your clothes, check your gear, talk to your crew, check in with them, make sure everybody's okay. So not only crew, but them making sure I'm okay, different opinions, different inputs. So it's nice and warm in there. Started to change clothes again because now it's 9 p.m. and we're about to go up to close to 11,000 feet up on the ridge at night, where the temperature's quick. Look at that. I got a phone call while I was on my podcast. So as I was saying, the temperatures quickly go to upper 20s, and that's without the wind. So clothing was back to gloves, hat, lamp, of course. I switched my headlamp and put on a real thick base layer so that hopefully I wouldn't get very cold as I run through the night. It's a little bit ominous because I've never run through the night from 9 p.m. to the next morning, and it's pretty rough terrain from what I looked at on the maps and the race reports and so on. And then we were just praying that there would not be too much wind, because 28 degrees plus wind on a ridge line, no matter how hard you're running, you're going to get cold. So basically just a thick thermal top, a running shell over that thermal top, baseball hat turned backwards with my headlamp on it, and some Patagonia gloves, thin trail running gloves, but what I thought would be enough, and shorts, same shoes still, same socks. Feet are starting to hurt. The quads have not gotten worse, and that was a big relief. After mile 31, I was worried about the quads all day. Sure, the Advil helped a bit, but I didn't take too many, not like my last race in Texas. So the fact that they weren't getting worse, the fact that I felt great running from 45 to 67, despite a bunch of downhills in that too, I was hopeful that they were holding up quite well and that they never got worse than that initial feeling early on in the race. So a little bit more Advil, a little bit more Coke in that Brighton ski resort aid station, and outside I went. And that's where it sort of started hitting me right away how cold it was, especially after having been in a warm lodge for a few minutes and sort of exhaling. But it was freezing out there. I was, of course, a little sweaty and wet in the clothes and so on, so quickly got very, very cold. And I looked at my new pacer, a good buddy of mine, and I just wondered, I hope it does not stay this cold, otherwise we're going to have to stop and I'm going to have to change into some more shells and layers that I brought in my backpack with me. Luckily, we went from 8,500 feet to 10,500 feet pretty quickly. So it became an aggressive hike straight uphill, 2,000 feet, probably in a matter of 4 miles, a little bit under 4 miles, 3.8 miles, I think. And we got warm. We never got cold, despite the temperatures being way below freezing, especially up on the ridge line. And just due to the elevation gain, the steepness of the course, and the clothing holding up quite well, warmth was not the issue anymore. What quickly became apparent now, as of mile 67, was that this was no longer running. This was just going to be hiking. The steepness of the course at this point, the darkness, as well as how as soon as you gain altitude, you go straight back down again into these valleys that are still at 9,000 feet, 8,500 feet, but you can't really run them downhill aggressively because they're too steep, they're too rocky, and so you're sort of jogging downhill cautiously, which then again affects your quads and how your foot is landing, and you don't have a good stride. So everything that you're hiking up, which the hikes take anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half at a time, that you can't make up any time, nor would you want to on these downhills. It's pretty desolate, it's pretty cold, it's pretty dark, obviously in the middle of the night, and it's pretty steep, and there's very little air, and it was hard. This is the part of the course where it really, really got hard. So the first 67 miles of this race were stunning. They were beautiful, they were runnable, they were in beautiful terrain. A lot of it was during the day, sure, in the morning from 5 a.m. to maybe 6:45 was dark, but the sunlight's coming up, so it's not really dark that long. You're up on a beautiful ridge line, and the scenery is stunning. Then you run through the day, you have this beautiful terrain, you're actually running a race, you get in and out of aid stations, you're supported, it's just truly, truly an epic, beautiful trail run. As of mile 67, the course of this race turns to basically 33 more miles of hiking. I would say the majority of my last 67 miles, or as I said to everybody at the finish, we hiked for 8 hours and ran for maybe 90 minutes. It is just brutal. It's steep and long and constant uphills. And then when we were running downhill, it's all very dusty, sandy, loose terrain. So this dust is so powerful and so strong that your lungs get filled with this dusty air, but B, it was so dusty, our steps created such dust clouds from running downhill that when when your foot hits the ground, it creates this cloud of dust. We couldn't see where we were running to because in our headlights, in that light ray, there was no visibility due to the dust, just from our own footsteps. Not because there was wind, not because there was somebody right in front of us, but just because it was just so dry and dusty. So you're running downhill, you would slip in this dust and just fall and be covered in soot. You couldn't get any footing. And then you go back uphill that was super steep. Plenty of times where I was hunched over, I needed to take a break for 30 seconds, 20 seconds, and just get myself together. Not because my legs or my body felt tired, but it was just so steep and so challenging that I needed to take a moment. And it's not because it was 3 or 4 or 5 minutes. It was 3 or 4 or 5 miles of steep uphills like this, where 3 miles at 22-minute miles takes a long time of just grinding uphill. And of course, I have 70 plus miles in my legs so far. So I would say the last 33 miles of this race course were nothing to write home about. Maybe I might have felt different had I seen the views on top of the ridge at 11,000 feet. But even the aid stations, we would roll in. Nobody would really be awake, or if they were awake, they would be surprised to see us, and it would be this sudden oh, hi, hey, what can we get you? Welcome to so-and-so aid station. And you grab a few things. I would sit down, exhale for maybe a minute or two, get as much food in as I could before you really have to get moving again because it's freezing cold. And at 25, 24, 20 degrees up there, as soon as you stop, even for just 2 minutes, it quickly gets very, very cold. They had pancakes at one aid station that they made me. They had pierogies at another 2 aid stations that they made me. But we got to figure these are way up there in the mountains, and these volunteers driving up there and setting up camp for basically 2 days and getting everything prepared and having things ready for runners. I'm not in any way critical that they weren't ready for a runner to come in. It's 2 in the morning, it's 3 in the morning, it's 4 in the morning. They've been there all day already, setting up and prepping. So, and it's cold. Of course, they're tired and not going to be looking for a runner every hour, maybe, or every 20 minutes, or every half hour. So it's pretty thin up at the front on these ultra races. Now I'm also hitting some aid stations and dealing with some serious blisters. Not because of my shoes or my socks, not because I wasn't wearing gaiters, which people have asked me if I did. It was mainly because this really, really fine dust had covered my feet for so many hours, and running downhill, you're on the front of your feet and your toes are jamming into the front of the shoes, and then they slide backwards for these long grinding uphills those grinding uphills where you hit your heels against the back of your shoes, and now you're rubbing on the dust and dry heels and feet against the Achilles part of your shoe too. So lots of blisters on the back of the feet, lots of blisters on the front of the feet, and they don't feel that bad yet. It's just that you can tell they're in there, and you don't want to stop too long because it's too cold. You're way up in the middle of nowhere on a ridgeline. They don't have any type of medical supplies, and you also think, well, it doesn't feel that bad, mainly because your feet are shot, and that you'll make it home the last, at this point, 15 miles okay. Some of these aid stations now at mile 85, for example, we're talking, there's some front of the pack guys that are just zombies in there. They took it out too hard, or they just hit a wall of some sort, and they're just taking an hour and a half break in there, eating, sleeping in front of these heat lamps, shoes off, socks off, trying to stay warm, but they lost the inertia, the mindset, the energy to keep going. So it's like a ghost scene up in there, and it's all very surreal to see some of these gnarly ultra runners lying in these tents, these big open tents at 4 in the morning, at 3 in the morning, up here on this mountain in the middle of nowhere. And again, you come in and it's just very serene. Everybody's just sort of out of it. You get your food, you get your few items, you sort of do a body check, you grab a few things for your backpack, and you say to yourself, well, don't sit down or don't stay too long. I got to keep moving. Got to get this done, because A, it's too cold, and B, once you rest too long, the momentum of getting back up and continuing to run is quite hard. And now the worst part of the course comes. It's basically from 85 to 95, it's straight downhill. You lose about 2,000 feet real quickly, and then another 3,000 feet over the next 4 or 5 miles. So it becomes just a quick drop off, and the trail is just complete sand, gravel, and dust. It's so steep at points that you can't even stop yourself from falling downhill, and you're also at a point where you almost don't care. If my legs were stronger or earlier in the race and they hadn't been so fatigued, you have the ability maybe to stop or run these gravelly, questionable trails downhill without rolling ankles, or you're a little bit more careful. But at this point, you can't stop yourself from falling, and you just get your feet under you and you just keep going. And I was quite lucky in that respect of not rolling an ankle or not crashing or not completely bailing and yard sail on this ridge or this rocky drop-off, because it is a very, very challenging last 10 miles, going straight downhill with your quad shot. You're out of it, your headlamp is getting weak, and you're low on calories. I'm doing Coke and potato chips at this point, and yeah, you're pretty miserable, and you're just annoyed with every little downhill because it's such bad terrain. And then you're really over all the uphills, which you're still hiking. You never get a chance to run. So you're either falling downhill or hiking uphill, very steep. At long last, we get off this ridge. We're down in normal altitude territory, 5,000, 6,000 feet. Of course, now we're going down into the valley, and it's getting colder and colder right before sunrise. The moisture's in the air. People are just absolutely freezing. And we're just trying to finish it out. Really, really hard miles. You're just really exhausted. You're probably, well, not you. I am very low on calories at this point, just because you're just tired of eating, you're tired of running, you're tired, and you just want to keep going and get to the finish line and eat some real food, or be done, or go to bed and take a shower. I wasn't necessarily dangerously behind in calories, but you're just cranky. It's 5 in the morning. You want this to end, and you know you can do the last few miles, but they take forever. At this point, we've also been running by ourselves or around the occasional runner for the last 6 hours. There's not a lot of people, not a lot of stimulus. You're just staring into this headlamp light in the pitch darkness. And so your concentration and your brain is just mush. So I kept drinking plenty during this race. I was peeing all the time throughout the race. So never ever did I get to a point of dehydration, which I was quite pleased about. Surely low on calories a few times, but finally off this mountain, finally can taste that we're close to the finish. It's mile 95. We run along this reservoir, Sleepy Hollow Reservoir, towards the finish, and of course the rollers and this beautiful wide trail, which on a normal day would be a great trail run. Nice run to get some strength and fitness for whether for Ironman or any type of running. But at this point, I'm 96 miles in and I'm over it. We've run through some cow pastures. We've run through some ridiculously bad trail. We had to open and close cow gates to stop the livestock from leaving the property. We're dodging cow poop. We're dodging cows, actually, staring right at us. This is the part of the course that's new this year, which I would give a very big thumbs down to. And so, finally, on this trail next to the reservoir, it's now 6 in the morning. Fully run through the night because the sun is now ever so slightly coming up over the mountain range. And we're getting into the last mile. Of course, in typical any type of ultra race fashion, whether even Ironman, ultra running, or something similar, you can see the finish line, but of course they take you on a loop away from it just to mess with you even more. And so finally, the last half mile on pavement on a road, uphill, of course, uphill again, and 25,000 feet of climbing. I finally made it to the finish line with my pacer and rolled in across this very empty, limited supplies finish line where there's maybe 5 people awake. There's no big fanfare, barely any lights. You can barely see it. Luckily, my entire crew was there, all 9 of them, with cars and cheering me on, so that was awesome. They took video and pictures, so everything's documented. And after 25 and a half hours, I crossed the finish line, hunched over a little bit, contemplated eating something at the finish line, looked at my crew and said, let's get out of here. I am so done, and I didn't want to get cold walking around a desolate finish line. There's not a single person there. Even when they did offer to make me pancakes, they first had to start the grill going again. So not quite Mike Riley and the voice of Iron Man and people cheering and loud music and lots of lights and colors and crazy stimulus. It's just very serene, very quiet. Half the people are asleep, and many funny stories around a very quiet and limited finish line. So that was that. My hardest 100-miler by far, since the last one was quite easy, and extremely, extremely challenging, and lots of lessons from it, but I will go over those in the next Pod Blast. I know I went over by a lot of time here, but I figured I just would get through this race report once, give you guys the full insight, the way I saw it, the way I felt it. I'll go over some of the lessons learned, what I would do different, and things like that in a brief, more focused Pod Blast coming up in the next few days after I capture some more thoughts and insights. But there you have it, the true blow-by-blow of Wasatch 100. So hopefully you enjoyed it. Hopefully there was a little bit of value to it. Hopefully there's a little bit of a story to it. And I'm sorry it was so long, but we'll get more focused and get more strategic and get more educational on these next few Pod Blasts. Alrighty, I hope to talk to you in a few days. And again, continue to send me questions, continue to send me topics and ideas and thoughts for this Pod Blast, because I have them all listed, printed out, emails ready to go, so I can discuss them all. This will be quite frequent. As you can see, it's getting easy for me to talk and just answer questions and go through things as we're moving along here. Hopefully soon, by the time we get to podcast 10, 11, 12, 13, or 14, we'll just be having a conversation that all of you hopefully will feel that I'm speaking directly to you. All right. Talk to you soon. Bye.